I love this guy, too. I had the pleasure of doing a presidential debate with him. Gerry Baker, he's the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, wonderful paper. And he's assured me that the Mansions section stays, which I love a lot as well, and I love his insight. And if you were to read the Journal and you were to follow up on what was going on in the campaign, I'm talking back in the heat of the campaign, while everyone else was bemoaning the prospects of what Donald Trump might bring, the Journal was stepping way back and looking at some of the positive underpinnings of that. And also, fair and balanced, looking at the pros and cons of each side, which is a novel concept that Gerry tries to live by. Very good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for having me. Thanks for those kind remarks.
These markets and this reaction, a little too heady, a little too much, getting ahead of themselves? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. So you've got a number of things going on. The first is, obviously, markets, investors generally are pretty excited about what they've heard from and what they expect from Donald Trump. That is, they do think there's going to be a pretty significant rollback of regulation that's going to unleash some of the animal spirits.
Like immediately? Or it's like a 100-day thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get, so there are certain things he can do under executive order,
right.
Through executive privilege. He can do things like, some of the, for example, Dodd-Frank, the financial regulation,
right.
the financial reform structure, the bill that was passed, that really tightened regulations on banks and financial institutions. There's a lot in there that he can direct the various agencies responsible for implementing that, basically not to do anything, to ignore. There are certain rules in there which are open to all kinds of vague interpretations. So he can take the brakes off there in lots of ways, and he can do that with other things too. EPA rules on some of the tough rules that the Obama administration's put in. He can rescind some of those. So I think there's a lot of expectation there that he'll do that. And there is a sense. I think a lot of people have a sense that the last 8 years, a lot of tough regulations were put in place after the financial crisis, more broadly than just the financial sector, which has held back growth. Banks can't lend to small businesses because they have to have higher levels of capital. They can't do all kinds of things that they would have done. They kind of grease the wheels.
So he might kind of unshackle them, which could explain why that sector has been the best performing.
Right, exactly.
But what is your take on how the media missed this and was looking at how awful he would be? I mean, the Journal would keep going back to, well, say what you will of his bluster and some of the tape embarrassment thing that came out. He is preaching something that generally investors like, but investors were more inclined to, at the time, settle on the sure thing because he was the wild card. We even saw that exhibited election night. What had you convinced that the world was missing something?
I mean, I think partly he didn't talk a lot about, I mean, two things. He didn't talk a lot about these issues. I mean, he laid it out in his campaign. He had a rather, Hillary had 10,000 policy positions. He had a very rather simpler, more readable plan, but it was there. But he didn't talk a lot about it. And I think more importantly, the media, let's be honest, they did obsess about his remarks. Some of his more extreme remarks is true.
Whether I find it ironic that that same group is criticizing the media for not being fair to its candidate.
Well, they fixated, didn't they, on on things that he said about immigrants, on things that he said about Muslims, on again, you can argue that a lot of those things were controversial, but nobody was really interested in or paying attention to what he was actually saying about regulation, because it's hard. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this, but
no, I know, but there's a disparity, right? There's a disparity. The people who say that the way he is on the stump, was these private meetings, it's a different guy. Who will be the president?
But I think honestly it's partly an indictment of a lot of political reporting in this country too. It's so much easier to focus on the people, right, and the things that they say and the things they've done and what they may have done and people who accuse them of having done things and their personal finances and their taxes. It's so much easier to focus on that and much harder to focus on whether or not Dodd-Frank is going to be fully implemented, or whether or not there are going to be changes to EPA rules on energy exploration, or whether there's going to be changes to rules that restrict certain financial institutions from doing things with certain types of lending. That's kind of, for a lot of reporters, that's hard work and boring.
Yeah, but they rue the day when they don't do it. Yeah. But how will he govern? In other words, there's enormous pressure on him to get out the gate immediately and do big things. But now we're getting word that he might have resistance, not so much from Democrats as fellow establishment Republicans, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, talking about making sure, tax cuts are revenue neutral,
Right.
which was a signal to, I think, supply-siders, don't go nuts on these
Right.
tax cuts.
Right.
How's that going to be settled?
Yeah, that's going to be, look, he was very, there were, some of what Trump said in the campaign was Republican orthodoxy, right? Tax cuts stimulate growth, deregulation stimulate growth, very much so. So conservative Republicans, more traditional Republicans, McConnell, Paul Ryan in the House, very much in line with that. But he also said some things, one that Republicans were concerned about, and two that do represent a challenge to any kind of economic orthodoxy. He did say, for example, he planned to do anything about entitlements. All the way through, and when you and I discussed it in the debate with him, he was very clear, no, they don't need to do anything. We're going to get the economy to grow. That will take care of any of the challenges to do with entitlements. So, and bluntly, most Republicans don't believe that. Most Republicans believe that something needs to be done about Social Security and Medicare, and they're right, because it's going to. They can't. Exactly. That's so. I think my guess is that there'll be a little bit of pushback there from Republicans, but the main thing is they'll get the economy growing, they'll get these deregulation measures, they'll get a tax program through, and then they'll think about some of these issues a little later in that first administration.
We shall see. Gerry Baker, Wall Street Journal editor-in-chief, very calm force at a paper. We're not known for being calm in this business. He's pretty calm.
Keep calm and carry on.
Makes me very suspicious of him.
Keep calm and carry on, is what my countryman said. Well,